Hi, and welcome to Tranquil Talks with Chris. I'm Chris, your host, and this is your space where you can come and slow down and catch your breath from the noise and chaos of work, and where you can feel supported to take one intentional step forward in how you communicate and lead. Today, we are at the fourth pillar of the plant framework that we've been looking at every day for the last week. The N of plant has everything to do with nurturing trust in hybrid environments. And I gotta say, this might very well be the pillar that matters the most in hybrid workplaces right now. When the world of work went distributed back in 2020, when hybrid became the new working model, we lost something. And I always hear people immediately saying that what we lost was productivity. Well, from what I've seen, people are just as productive, quite frankly, if not more productive, working remotely or in hybrid environments. So I'm certainly not on the side of it's been productivity that we lost. But I do believe that what we have lost has been the organic, the natural, the almost effortless trust building that happened when we were in shared physical spaces. The things like the casual conversations around the coffee machine that helped break up the workday, or the hallway exchange that gave you context before a really difficult meeting, or the shared lunches where team members bonded further as human beings over personal stories and lots of laughter. None of these moments were ever on anyone's calendar. They weren't designed, they weren't intentionally chosen to happen. They just happened. And certainly they built trust over and over and over again. And I realize of course, in hybrid environments, these sorts of spontaneous opportunities for connection don't just happen anymore by accident. And to stay very clear, this doesn't mean that trust is impossible in hybrid orgs. But what it does mean is that trust has to be built and nurtured differently. Now with intention, and now with deliberate choices to design it right into how teams work together, rather than leaving it up to chance or assumption that it's somehow magically going to happen. And I'm here to tell you that the organizations that have been figuring this out and that will continue to figure this out, they're not just retaining their people, they are outperforming their competitors in the market. And they're creating such a beautifully compelling culture where teams actually want to show up for each other. Today, I want to share a client story with you of a team that I worked with a couple of years back. It was a fully hybrid team. Some people were fully remote. Some people worked in the office a few days a week. And there were a couple of team members in totally different time zones. On the surface and by traditional organizational standards, this was a very high-performing team. They were delivering results. Actually, they were knocking results out of the park quarter after quarter after quarter. They were constantly meeting deadlines. Actually, they were often delivering ahead of deadlines. What? Crazy, right? When I started working with this team, we began our partnership the way I always do when I work with a direct leader with their direct intact team. We began by co-creating their team trust blueprint. And as part of that beginning of the engagement, I held one-on-ones with each team member to ask them specifically around trust or about trust. And they all said shades of the same thing, ultimately that I trust my teammates to do their jobs. Great. That's great. That was a great piece of data. Interestingly, though, the answers were quite different when I asked them whether they felt genuinely known by their teammates, when I asked them whether they felt safe to bring forward an idea that hadn't quite crystallized in their mind, but did they feel okay to bring that forward nonetheless? How comfortable were they admitting that they were struggling or disagreeing openly in meetings, things of that nature? As I said, the answers here were quite different. So for this team, competence trust or trust in their capabilities was quite high. But relational or relationship trust was quite low, actually almost absent for this team. And that gap was costing them. It was costing them in the ideas that were never getting raised. It was costing them in problems that were staying very internal to the individuals for way too long. And for this particular team, it was costing them because there were a couple of colleagues that wanted to work somewhere else entirely. I've worked with and I've connected with a lot of managers and leaders for whom their natural default or go-to when thinking about nurturing trust is to get some team building activities on the calendar, or, more aptly described as forced fun, is what they want to do. And that ain't it. That's not going to fly, and hasn't for most teams. When we think about and when we want to work through nurturing trust, it's all about creating the conditions where people feel truly safe to show up as themselves, and who also feel just as confident that their teammates are doing the same thing, showing up as themselves. So for today's episode, I want to walk you through 3 practices that will be supplemented with 1 or 2 tips each that can help you and your team make a real difference when it comes to nurturing trust intentionally in your hybrid environment. So let's start with the first one, which is all about consistency in communication cadences. Trust is very much built through predictability. When people know what to expect from you, things like when your check-ins are going to happen, how you typically communicate, how you show up in meetings, when they know what to expect from you in these ways, their nervous systems can relax because they don't have to expend energy wondering where they stand. And this is especially important for leaders in particular, because, and I know you know this, so this will be more of a reminder, your team is constantly reading your cues. They are taking your lead. So when your communication is more inconsistent, that's creating anxiety on your team, even when nothing is actually wrong. That inconsistency truly throws people off. So to help you work on that, if this is an area that you feel needs to be a little bit more finessed, my first suggestion would be for you to take some time, take 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and design your own personal communication cadence as a leader. What this is all about is creating something or designing something that's simple and repeatable, so that it becomes a reliable pattern that you and your team can count on. And maybe it'll look like something such as something as simple as committing to holding brief team updates every Monday morning, offering or sending out check-in messages to each of your teammates or team direct reports by the middle of the week, and then closing out the week on Fridays with acknowledgments to each person. whatever it is that you choose to design, that is certainly well within your good hands and your good mind. While the specific elements of your communication rhythm or cadence is valid and important, what matters even more is the consistency of what you choose to do. And I know I already said this, but it bears repeating. When people know what to expect from you, when your communication is seen as and is consistent, predictable, reliable, their nervous systems can relax. And that relaxation is the foundation of trust. You're not just communicating information, you are communicating safety to your team. Another thing that you may want to try is what I call the consistency audit. And with this audit, I invite you to look back to the last four weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, no more than 4 weeks of your communication as a leader. And I invite you to reflect on it and notice any patterns. Specifically, were you consistent from a communication standpoint? Did your team always know when to expect to hear from you? Were you reliable with steady check-ins? Or did your communication feel unpredictable? And then ask yourself honestly, what message does inconsistency in my communication send to my team, even when nothing is actually wrong? And then what would it feel like for them when I begin to be more consistent with my communication patterns? Now, when I'm talking consistency, I'm focusing fully on reliability. I'm not here to say, hey, you now have to amp up the volume. You've got to be flooding them with messages, flooding your team and your calendars with so many more check-ins because it's something you have to do. Again, what I'm talking about here is about reliability. That is one of the most beautifully powerful trust-building practices a hybrid leader has available to them. Okay, so that was the first practice to go over, consistency and communication cadences. The second practice that can make a real difference for nurturing trust is transparent commitments. Nothing erodes trust faster than when people say they'll do something and then don't. And then not only that, but they don't provide any visibility or any understanding to the context or to the why it didn't happen. So transparent commitments mean literally that. It's transparent. You're being open, you're being upfront. You're being very clear about what you're taking on. You're being honest about what you can't, and proactive about communicating when something changes. With transparent commitments, you're helping to create a culture where people acknowledge that it's safer and it's more meaningful and more accountable to declare when a deadline cannot be met and to share the why, rather than being silent or praying and hoping that no one notices that they completely missed a deadline. And I want to just take a moment here to make sure I'm being very clear in what I'm trying to communicate as the point. While I've made the point, I want to stretch it just a bit longer, for just a bit more. I am a huge fan, as is every other leader that I've worked with, huge fan of honoring our commitments, working to meet deadlines, to exceed deadlines, all of that good stuff. So when I'm talking transparent commitments and I'm talking about empowering people to feel comfortable telling you when they can't meet a deadline, I am not at all looking to devalue or undermine the importance of honoring commitments. But the point I want, and I hope that you'll take away from this particular practice, is that, again, it is important to create the conditions of psychological safety and not have people afraid or uncomfortable in being open and honest when things do go sideways, because they absolutely will go sideways at times. And certainly with transparent commitments, it is important that leaders start that by modeling it, right? So it's just as much our responsibility as a leader to be making those declarations when things kind of go sideways or not quite working out. You're giving others the permission to do the same, right? Again, they're reading our cues, taking the lead from us. So to help you out here, I offer you an experiment, which I call the commitment clarity practice. And that is when you make a commitment now, every time that you go to make a commitment, whether to a fellow peer, to your direct report, to whomever, to work to making it super specific and clear rather than general or implied. So instead of saying things like, I'll get back to you on that, try swapping that for saying, I'll have a response to you by end of day tomorrow. Or instead of saying, let's circle back on this, say instead, let's schedule 30 minutes next week. And by this afternoon, I will send us out a calendar invite for that one-on-one next week. Specific commitments are easier to keep than commitments that are so vague. They're also easier for the other person to count on. You are making deposits into a person's trust account, right? When you say you're going to do something and do it. When you're not able to do something, you own it and you acknowledge it to them and you explain the why. And then I know this next suggestion will be really a repeat, but it bears repeating and reinforcement. It all starts with us as leaders to model the behavior change we want to see, the practice that we want to be putting in place. So it's all about modeling the culture, model the behavior. Next time a deadline slips, and it will, it has for everyone, don't avoid it, don't ghost it. Try saying something like, I promised X by Y, and that's not happening. Here's why, and my new timeline is Z. Modeling that honesty will go a very long way, and you will begin to see your team doing the same thing as well. Okay, that was the second dimension, that second practice. Now let's round it out with the third and final practice that can really help nurture trust, specifically in hybrid environments, which is all about designing for connection, designing for the enrichment of relationships rather than leaving it to chance. Don't assume that it's just magically going to happen. I know that this has been said a few times over this episode so far, but that is the reality. Again, in hybrid teams, connection doesn't happen spontaneously or accidentally anymore. So it has to have design and intention behind it. But when I'm talking designing something, I'm not talking about manipulating or being false in our attempts to build connection. I am never a fan, never have been a fan, never will be a fan of things that are disingenuous or false. Cannot stand that. I am talking about here purely things that are genuine, that want to feel more natural. And they don't have to be such difficult practices to develop more connection. Quite frankly, I think that we overcomplicate leadership a little too often. It's beautifully simple at times. Recognize that connection will look different for every team and for every person on the team. Know that you as the leader do not have to have all the answers. I know that there can still be this guttural instinct or expectation, this unspoken expectation. We have to have all the answers. You don't. You can invite your team in. Let them know that you want to continue to build connections. You want interconnections within your team. and get your team's take on what that might look like. So just know the pressure is not on you to do that, whatever that might be. And I think this naturally segues into a couple of suggestions I want to offer you. The first one I'll start with is what I call the one real question practice. What I mean by this is, try this at your next team meeting. Work to replace the likely default that I know most leaders start a meeting with, which is how's everyone doing today? It's going to lead more often than not to just natural social instincts, right? Yeah, of course, I'm fine. Yeah, good, thanks. How are you? Very rarely does it actually offer something meaningful. So work to replace that as your default opener, and instead start with one real question. And I know that you know your people best, so you will have instincts to what a real question would be. And certainly experiment with it from meeting to meeting. But it could be things like, what's one thing that felt good about your work this week? Or try, what's something you're really looking forward to this month? Or you can even try, what's been on your mind lately that we haven't talked about as a team just yet? And for this suggestion, it's not only about looking to start your meeting with one real question. Ensure that you are giving a healthy pause, giving people a moment to actually think of answers to that question. And model it yourself too. Include yourself in providing a genuine answer to that conversation. That's one suggestion for you. And another that ties nicely to this is about designing one connection ritual and protecting it fiercely. Again, I invite you to be thinking about your team and thinking about what would feel like genuine connection to them. Not what you think it should be, not what some HR policy possibly suggests, but what actually would help you and your people together feel seen and valued on a regular basis. And once you've thought of that, and again, you don't have to go it alone, you can invite your team in to co-pilot some ideas. Again, know that you don't have to do this alone. However you do it, solo or with your team's input, then design a simple ritual around whatever would feel like good, genuine connection. To offer some examples here, perhaps it's starting a thread on Slack or Teams for weekly wins, where anyone can share a small win, and that can be professional or personal. Or as another example, it's hosting a monthly virtual coffee with with your team, and no work topics are allowed. Or it's committing to having a standing end of week message from you that acknowledges something specific that you noticed about someone on the team. And again, whatever practice that is, you are going to notice the adoption of it by others. All I'm asking is for you to choose one, commit to it for 30 days without skipping it, and then notice what shifts in how your team shows up for each other. These rituals, the consistency, not just the rituals, but the consistency of the rituals, truly sends the message that people matter. They matter more than productivity. They are the number one. And when you repeat this over time, I promise you that you are building the kind of trust that smooths out so much other stuff that you and your team are going through. As always, I am going to be including the practice guide for this pillar, which is a compilation of the 3 practices I spoke and shared about today, with the 1 or 2 suggestions per per practice. So that's going to sit in a practice guide that will sit within today's show notes that you can grab and return to as often as you need to. And as we get ready to wrap up from today's episode, I also always geek out in being able to offer you one little mini experiment beyond the other tips I've given you, another experiment you can think about implementing right away. From this pillar, the experiment is a trust temperature check. Think about the team that you're either part of or certainly that you are leading and responsible for. And ask yourself, do people on this team feel safe to bring problems forward before they escalate or become crises? Ask yourself as well, do people feel genuinely known, not just professionally, but as a whole person? And thirdly, is there a consistent, predictable cadence of communication that people can rely on? You can choose to score yourself if you wish, but that's not necessary. What I really want you to take away is noticing where the answers feel solid for you from these three questions and where there might be a gap worth paying more attention to. Trust is built in small, consistent moments, and it starts with knowing where you are. As always, I want to thank you for sharing your time with me and being here today. Nurturing trust is the absolute foundation that every communication operating system runs on. Without it, all the norms, all of your processes, all of your frameworks at your disposal, they're simply not going to hold or stick. But with trust, anything becomes possible. In tomorrow's final episode of this particular limited series, we get to our final pillar, T for transformation through feedback and feed forward. And this pillar is where everything that we've been building in this series comes together into something that creates lasting change. I can't wait to share it with you tomorrow. Until then, take good care of yourself. And please know that here at Tranquil Talks with Chris, you are always welcome here and you belong. Cheers.